we have so many attendees. There's 84 people in the session, which I think is just great. So my name is Felicity Fonseca. I just want to introduce myself. I am the new community engagement librarian at Los Alamos County Library System. And I'd love to hear from you what kind of programming you would like to see from the library. And I guess this is a good indicator that there's such good attendance tonight. Feel free to give me any feedback or send me any suggestions that you would like to see Los Alamos County Library System, any kind of programming that you'd like to see. So welcome to the Growing Together series. This is presented in collaboration with Pajarito Environmental Education Center and Los Alamos Historic Society. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is the noted author of Braiding Sweetgrass, says one way to engage with and build a relationship with the land is to garden. Because this program is about gardening and native plants, I also want to share this. I learned from Dr. Joseph Aguilar of San Ildefonso Pueblo. I'm just going to admit a few more people to the waiting room here, or admit them into the meeting. I learned from Dr. Joseph Aguilar of San Ildefonso Pueblo that the Pajarito Plateau, where the communities of Los Alamos and White Rock are situated, is the ancestral and contemporary unceded homelands to San Ildefonso Pueblo. The Tewa name of San Ildefonso is Powoge Owinge, which means where the water cuts through. The water that the name refers to is the Posuge River or Powake River. San Ildefonso recognizes the interdependence of time, place, and history, and that the past and present are connected and embedded in this place. And just wanted to mention in terms of Zoom housekeeping, please keep yourself muted, and we will take questions in the chat. I'm also going to be recording this session. Now I would like to present and welcome Marisa Thomson. Marisa is the Extension Urban Horticulture Specialist for New Mexico State University. She is responsible for active cooperative extension and research programs supporting sustainable horticulture. She studies landscape mulches for improved perennial plant root establishment, tomato growing practices that reduce disease pressures while increasing water conservation, and abiotic plant stressors like wind, cold, heat, drought, and soil compaction. She writes a weekly gardening column. You can find her at desertblooms.nmsu.edu. Thank you so much, Marisa, for presenting for us tonight, and welcome, and I will pass the session over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Can you hear me okay? All right, thanks. Yeah, and the contact info, yeah, well, I'll put it in the chat. That's a great idea. Let me go do that right now. So my contact info, let's see. So the email, desertblooms@nmsu.edu. And I'll put a couple different links. I'll try to put links in the chat as we go along as well. Let's see, I'm gonna get my screens all set up here because I'm gonna share my screen. And let's see, share. I'm going to share this one. I think this will work. And I appreciate that some of you gave a thumbs up a minute ago when I shared. So if you can wave, I can see some of you. So I'll be, if you wave and show me that you can't see something, that'll be really helpful. I do like to click around a lot. We do welcome questions, and I'll have time at the end to answer questions, so that questions can be in the chat, like Felicity said. And let's see, with that, I do welcome, I like it when people have their screens, turned on, so that I can at least see some people and we can kind of imagine for a minute that we're in the same room. But if you're having trouble understanding me, it may help your bandwidth to go ahead and turn off your camera, and that might help a little bit so that it won't be so jumpy. So that's one tip. let's see. Yeah, so then I think you can see my slides, and as long as I can see my slides, let me make sure. I have all the participants here, and I probably won't be able to see the chat. So, you know, Felicity, if you'll give me a heads up if you want me to see something in the chat, that'd be great. All right. With that, here we have native plants for New Mexico gardens. And again, my name's Marisa Thomson, and I have a bunch of beautiful pictures to show you and some exciting resources to discuss. And then we'll get into your questions. So first of all, just a couple beautiful pictures. One thing you'll learn about me, if you don't know me already, is that I love my job. So this is a sacred datura. It's a special variety that's it's something swirl. And this picture I took at the Santa Fe Opera House. We got to go do a site visit there and look at plants in the garden and do diagnostic work. I really love the detective work that comes with trying to figure out what these plants are trying to tell us. Usually they are either whispering or screaming, water. So that is usually the problem, but not always. So then this is another native plant. This one is the California poppy or Mexican California, excuse me, the Mexican gold poppy. And that picture is down from El Paso in the El Paso mountains, the Franklin Mountains there. This one is Riddle's ragwort with a beautiful little butterfly on it. And so I welcome you, and I bet you already know that when you have these native plants in your garden, or an adapted species too, you'll find all kinds of stuff if you just slow down and stare at them, if you hang out around them, all kinds of beneficial insects, birds. We'll get into birds a little bit later in the talk, and also some pests, which, you know, pests happen, and it's okay, and it's okay to let them go through their population cycle and their life cycle in hopes that they will be attracting the beneficial insects to come in and help take care of those populations. Oh man, this picture I took back in September up in the Manzano Mountains. So I'm based in Los Lunas, just south of Albuquerque. And I get to go up each fall to see the big-tooth maples. These are native maples up in the Manzanos. And I tried to look and see if y'all have big-tooth maples up in Los Alamos County. And I didn't see any in the iNaturalist app. Do y'all know? I see a couple people saying, no, you don't have them. Maybe it's something that would be appropriate for your gardens. It might still be a little bit too warm for your yards. But they are a beautiful plant. And if you have a chance in September or October to go up into the Manzanos, I really, really recommend you do. So a little bit of background about my program and New Mexico State University. So we have these cooperative extension programs across the country, and they are the land-grant universities in each state. So in New Mexico, we have county extension programs in each of our 33 counties. And we also have these 12 ag science centers. These are research farms, and I get to work at one of them. And know that map is so small. Even if we were live in an auditorium, it would be really small, but it's those little green arrows. So I'm gonna try to move my cursor over here. Can you see my cursor when I move it? Yes? Oh, okay, good. All right, so I'm based at this one here in Las Lunas in Valencia County. And it's a 200+ research farm that's been growing since 1957. We've got all kinds of alfalfa and teff and grapes. A bunch of grapes I heard were planted today. Then we also have a pollinator garden and research on squash and fruit trees. When I started there 3.5 years ago, I inherited a plot that has 23 cultivars of peaches. 4 of each. So it's pretty fun. These research centers are placed strategically around the state because, as y'all know, it's very diverse from one part of New Mexico to another. And so the questions about does something grow well up in Union County can be answered better if we are also growing things in Artesia and growing them up in Farmington, and we can compare how things do in different parts of the state. So this is the signage for ours in Las Lunas. And so we have these county extension agents and also statewide specialists. And so I'm a specialist, and my program is the Extension Urban Horticulture Program. And I get to study tomatoes. So that's fun each year. We get plenty of tomatoes. This is a little emoji I made up that I'm very proud of because I've just put the tomatoes as eyes on that little smiley face. But this program with studying tomatoes this summer and last summer, we're studying the effects of shade on these tomato plants as far as disease resistance and susceptibility to insect problems, but also water usage and yield on the plants. So we get volunteers from the community to come and help harvest tomatoes, and they have to weigh them, but then they get to take a lot home, so they don't seem to mind. For my program, for this urban horticulture program, I'm split between educational programs, research programs. So educational things are things like we're doing tonight. This is adult non-formal education, so I get to work with the community. And the research programs, like I said, I study tomatoes and also study mulch. And I'll be speaking for this program in, I think it's in just under 2 weeks about mulch. Sounds boring, but I promise it's not. Mulch is really cool. So you'll have to come back for that one. But I write a weekly gardening column. It's called Southwest Yard and Garden. And my predecessor and his predecessor wrote it for 30 years before I started. But this is pretty much the funnest part of my program. And I take questions from the public, and either I answer them or I find answers and find other experts locally to help us figure out these answers. The idea for me is that I want it to be not something you can just Google. I want it to be really related to New Mexico gardening. And so it's a fun challenge. We also offer different kinds of workshops in normal years. So if you follow me on social media, my program is under NM Desert Blooms. I have all kinds of workshops around the state at different times of the year. Okay, so getting into native plants and first defining what's native. So a couple different definitions just to share with you. Native plants can be defined as species that exist in a region without human introduction. So without the human movement of plants. Another simpler way to say it might be that these are plants of indigenous origin. So they're indigenous to this region, but it gets pretty confusing after that. You think that you have this basic definition and it would be real clear, but it's not, because the regions like our county lines and our state lines and the whole Southwest, they, even within the smallest of those defined areas, there can be very big differences in plant populations. And so let's zoom in a little bit to where most of y'all are from in Los Alamos County. Even just within your county line, you have these really extreme differences. As you go up past White Rock, it really, the foliage and the plants change as you move in the topography. So this is a problem that we're seeing, and in Extension, we're getting questions all the time about plants that are native but not doing well in New Mexico. So somebody in Artesia, actually I use this as an example because it's happened before, but then it just even came up last Friday. I got this question that there are pinon trees in Artesia that aren't doing well, and it is a native tree, but it's not really native to those really hot regions of the state. And so that gets confusing. It's our state tree, and you'd think that people think they're doing the right thing, you see, by planting something like a pinon, but it turns out that it really needs a colder climate, someplace it's going to get some nice snowfall. And we're seeing plants like that really stress out in our urban centers more and more in the recent years with climate change and warming. This is a map from New Mexico State Forestry that I like to use to try to help us think more about what's native and what's our native cover of plants. So this is showing that only about a third of New Mexico is naturally forested. And y'all are lucky up in Los Alamos County, where most of the county is within this naturally forested realm. But a lot of these new neighborhoods are coming up in, in the West Mesa, in Albuquerque, and the West Mesa and Las Cruces too. But not just, I don't mean to just point out those places, but the fact is we're getting more and more neighborhood growth and residential growth in areas that didn't normally have trees, but they want to plant trees and have shade and this diversity of species in these areas that these plants didn't traditionally grow. So this is a problem, and it's something that we want to face together. One thing that's what really struck me, and maybe you can give me a show of hands, I can't see everybody on my screen, but how many of you were at the Native Plant Society conference in Santa Fe like a year and a half ago and saw David Solomon's talk? Well, I was there, and so I'm crediting David Solomon of Waterwise Gardening in Santa Fe with this concept that really shook me when he spoke at the Native Plant Society conference. He made a very compelling argument for rethinking how we think about our native zones and our native regions and our responsibility as New Mexicans and wanting to green up our yards and our urban centers. He pointed out that you can see in the state of New Mexico in this map that there are several of these ecoregions, the major ecoregions of North America. Several of them come together here in New Mexico, and so that is both challenging because it means that from one spot to another, you could be a very different climate and very different habitat for plants. But it's also, there's a challenge, I think, and for us as gardeners to use this information, and David Solomon's suggestion was that we widen our definition of native, and that we have an opportunity in New Mexico with so many of these different ecoregions coming together to pick from a much larger plant palette. And I think that's something that's very interesting and compelling. And then he also urged us to consider that with climate change, as temperatures are warming and we're having more problems with drought and more stress on plants, more of these abiotic non-living stressors, that's like environmental stressors on plants, means that we are expecting to have, and we're already seeing, much more problems with pests and diseases as well, because so many of these pests, like boring insects, for example, tree borers, often prefer to or show preference for attacking trees that are already stressed, right? So they become secondary problems that might do the tree in. But well, anyway, okay. So with global warming, we're expecting to see more and more stress, and the range of the natural range of these plant species is starting to move a little bit. I became a master gardener in Bernalillo County in 2008. And back then I remember that some of the rules were don't plant ocotillo, Texas sage or leucophyllum was not recommended because it's not quite cold hardy enough for Albuquerque. Even something like Palo Verde was barely planted in Las Cruces 20 or 30 years ago, and now has been planted more and more. But even just since I've been in New Mexico 15 years, there's been a real shift in what's possible in our gardens in these urban centers. So something like, and y'all, I looked up the USDA cold hardiness zone for Los Alamos earlier and saw that you really are kind of right there between Albuquerque and Santa Fe in terms of cold exposure. And so some of the plants that are doing well now in Albuquerque, you can be expecting them to do better and better in your region in the coming decades. Some examples might be pomegranates, figs, those that I just mentioned, the ocotillo. And so David Solomon's suggestion is that we take all this information together and imagine that as in the coming decades that we don't know exactly which bird species or insect species may need to be find habitat in communities where they didn't used to need to find a habitat, right? So the idea was, if you're planting from this more diverse palette, we will be more equipped to provide sustenance for these different wildlife species as time goes on. So I think that's very interesting. And I appreciate thinking outside the box. So here are the different ecoregions that are represented here in New Mexico. Okay, why garden with native plants? I think that it seems like most of you, if you signed up to come to this class, then you already know the benefits of native, so we'll go through this quickly. But native plants are adapted to the local climate and soil conditions where they naturally occur. These important plant species provide nectar, pollen, and seeds that serve as food for native butterflies, insects, birds, and other animals. And then I have some pictures of one of my very favorites. Oops. Here, the golden currant, Ribes aureum. And y'all grow golden currant up in Los Alamos. I've seen some pictures of them growing up in the Taos area, so I'm pretty sure they're cold hardy there too. I was really concerned these golden currants that are growing in the bosque in Las Lunas. We just had a bosque fire there maybe a month ago. And so I went 3 days after the fire to go look for the golden currants that I've been visiting there year after year. And wow, I was so excited to see them, several of them still alive and that were right there amidst the fire. And then I've been back since then and seen these little tiny golden currants coming up through the debris in the soil, and sometimes even through the ash. And so golden currant is one that I'm very, very fond of. I heard a gardener said one time that when the golden currant's in bloom, that's when you should put your hummingbird feeders out. So I try to track it each year so I know. So these are some of the pictures I took down there. The golden currant also makes oh yeah, and this little one in my front yard. I thought that he had died last year, or she, but anyway, I was happy to see it leaf out just a few weeks ago. So the golden currants also create a currant that is not a fruit, that is edible and delicious, that isn't golden, it's dark, almost black, purple. And a couple other flowers from our learning garden. We have a pollinator learning garden at the Ag Science Center in Las Lunas. And so that's the Rocky Mountain penstemon and one of the blanket flowers. Have any of you been up to the Los Alamos Nature Center to see the penstemons this year? Yeah, okay, Bernice had, a bunch of you have. I wasn't able to go. Do you think I'm gonna miss it if I go this weekend or next weekend? Is it already over? Well, if you don't know, there are over 200 species of penstemons that are grown right there in your county, and it's a really incredible project. So something that I'm envious of and want to have more in my yard. Okay, so more reasons to garden with native plants. Native plants don't require fertilizer, and few require any kind of pesticides. Then native plants require less water, and they also, of course, help with erosion. And the same is true then for native grasses, minimizing soil erosion, increasing organic matter in the soil as these perennial plants and annuals too, as their roots grow and then die. Every time that those fluctuations happen with each irrigation cycle and also with each season, there's more and more organic matter that's being added to the soil. And then also, of course, as the leaf litter drops, we are increasing the potential for more organic matter in the soil. So we said low nutrient requirements, low water requirements. And here's something that I really want us to focus on. We tend to think that native plants can survive with no water. That's not exactly true. You know, as far as supplemental water, many species require supplemental water, and it's hard to even come up with any that could handle zero water. You know, that picture of the datura that I showed from the Santa Fe Opera, that's an example, datura, of one that can thrive without water. Of course, it's going to grow better with a little bit more, but the species, we really do need to water to get plants established, and then also supplementing through as much as possible on the extreme heat weeks when we have no rain. This is a photo from the Albuquerque Water Utility Authority's excellent xeriscaping guide. And I have a bunch of pictures from plants of the Southwest, of native grasses. So one thing that we're considering a lot is that is pollinator species, and encouraging the planting of plants that attract pollinators. And grasses are wind pollinated, so they actually are not specifically doing something special for our pollinators. But there's a lot of research that has shown that the more diversity of plants you have in a garden, including grasses, the more diversity you have of insects, the more diversity of birds. And so it's part of this ecological richness to have more species. So don't forget about the grasses. And then just real quick, a plug that especially for cold hardiness and getting through the winter, but also just for the aesthetic reason, please try to hold off as late as you can to prune your ornamental grasses so that you can have that beautiful fall and winter aesthetic and also habitat for birds. But it's also better for the plant overall to hold that as long as possible. I always wait too long, and then by the time I'm ready to go cut it down, I'm cutting back some of my own new growth, but it's okay. They seem to survive just fine. Some more examples of beautiful xeric gardens. That's another misconception, that xeric means that it's just rock and a prickly pear. Actually, xeric gardens can and should be, they can be lush and also still conserve water by not requiring too much extra input. Muley grasses often have this pink color to them. That's that flower on, or excuse me, that grass on the right, and especially beautiful when the sunlight flows through them if you have it placed strategically in your yard. Here's another, this is the needle and thread grass that can be a little bit grow too well. And so depending on where you are in New Mexico, you may have seen that some people have problems with this one where it grows up and takes over. Sand love grass is a native grass. It's one of my very favorites. And so is this side oats grama. Beautiful. Okay, so I bet y'all know, what's the state grass of New Mexico? And if we were here, you could shout it out, you know, if we were here live, but I think you guys already know it. It's this beautiful blue grama. So blue grama is another native grass that I recommend trying. A couple other shrubs to try. This is the three-leaf sumac. These photos are thanks to Margot Murdoch in Albuquerque. So three-leaf sumac is a native plant, and then there are several different varieties. There's like the low grow, and there's a couple others that are for different aesthetic purposes, but they're very similar, the same species, genus and species for sure. But the three-leaf sumac is a beautiful one, and doesn't need very much care, and so that can be a benefit. Another great one is this New Mexico olive. It's one that often we don't think about the fall foliage that these native plants can provide, but they can be really beautiful. So this New Mexico olive is the plant that I chose to study mulches on. So when I talk about mulches in a minute, I'll show you the plots that have little tiny New Mexico olive trees planted in each of the mulch plots. Okay, getting into resources. So I happen to be out of town. I'm in South Carolina. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, so I'm here now. So I don't have my pile of books that I love with me, But I did want to recommend a couple of really good resources for you. And I got a really good question from someone, and I didn't get the name. I don't know, Felicity, if the person that sent in the question about shrubs for birds, if they're on this call, or on this webinar with us. But I was thinking, as soon as I saw the question, which I'll get to in a second, I thought, gosh, I wish I had all my books so I can go look things up and answer this question more fully. But I came up with a really good solution. I think you're going to like it. Okay, so some other of the resources that I recommend: the Native Plant Society of New Mexico. I'll show you their website. There's all kinds of local nurseries in and around Los Alamos County that are great resources for you. And what I would like is for, it's like for gardeners to be asking, have you seen this plant, this New Mexico olive or an Agastaki? And then if the nursery doesn't grow it, I hope that they're learning to to stay tuned with what the public wants, and hopefully by asking for some of these species more and more, we'll see them more at our local nurseries. So a bunch of online resources are available, and I think when we get into the questions, we'll be able to cover those a little bit more. So this is the question that came in via email. Which native shrubs are particularly great for backyard birds in New Mexico? And so, like I said, I saw that question and just cringed because I don't have the books that I would normally go to. But I decided just this evening to plug this question in to my favorite online resources on Facebook. So I get it that a lot of people don't like Facebook for many reasons, and I signed off of Facebook for a couple of years, and it was really, really fun. But now I'm back on, and I use them for work. And so these two particular resources, if you're not part of either of these groups, Birding New Mexico or Native Plants of New Mexico, and there are many others that are excellent local resources where you can put in your plant questions. You can take a photo of a plant while you're on a hike and post it here, and these knowledgeable people just chime in to help you answer it. So this turns out to be a good example of how to use this resource because I happen to be out of town. So we're going to go through some of the answers we got just in the last couple hours since I posted this question. So I did block off some of the names because I didn't ask anybody if I could share their names, but some of these are posted publicly, so it would probably be okay. One of the answers we got was that New Mexico olive. And here it's referenced as Forestiera pubescens. I'm more familiar with Forestiera neomexicana, but they also recommend for cooler parts of the state, chokecherry. That would be one of the prunus, so related to peach and plum. Another one that I liked was the recommendation of yucca. And as soon as I saw that this person posted yucca, I'm remembering that every time you walk by, or I walk by yuccas, you see that there's birds like flying all around within not just the flower stalk, but around in the yucca leaves themselves. Even at these really remote gas station, rest areas through New Mexico, there'll be yuccas, and then as you walk by, you notice there's birds swarming around them. So that's a great example. Then we got all of these recommendations: wolfberry, another call for New Mexico olive, golden currant, sand cherry, western sand cherry, the three-leaf sumac, Russian hawthorn, and then for hummingbirds, more specifics. So the Salvia gregii, I've seen a bunch of hummingbirds on my Salvia gregii. Those are those little autumn sage plants in my yard. We have hummingbird trumpet flower, Agastakis, the claret cup cactus, which have already bloomed but are great for early season hummingbirds. The red yucca, that's that Texas red yucca, all different kinds of penstemons, torch lily, Mexican red sage. And so these are just a couple recommended by one person. Another person just linked to another entire resource to check out. And so I did save this. Oh, let's see if I can get it here. I wanted to put it in the chat. This is this resource that I haven't had a chance to check out yet. Hmm.
No, no.
Uh-oh. I think I was able to mute them in time. Let's see. I'm going to go to get this resource for you. Well, sugar. I might not be able to click on it. I'll put it as soon as we get into the chat and I go off of this. So anyway, you could search this. This is native plants at Audubon, but there's one specific for plants in New Mexico. So, oops. Then another person commented, you want bugs. And I really like that because sometimes we think about the bugs in our yard as being such a problem with as pests. But another thing, they also are attracting beneficial insects and attracting birds. And so that's an important one. The more bugs, the better for birds. One person gave a shout out for golden currant. And so I already told you I'm partial to that one. So I already answered back, me too. And I wanted to share with you some of these other pictures I have of golden currants through the years growing in the bosque there, with the most recent picture after the fire on the right. So there was more. I mean, I guess I wanted to point out how strong a resource these Facebook groups can be, and I think you're getting the message. This is just within the last couple hours, people are posting all kinds of great answers. So penstemons, and then another shout out for that hyssop that's also called agastaki. And then somebody else said, I'd answer, but everybody's pretty much nailed everything I would suggest. And she recommended a specific type of hyssop. And then another person saying desert willow and how good they can be for birds. A couple people mentioned desert willow. Naima Shea, I want to leave her name on because she was one that posted a photo. So she suggested here in El Dorado, they like crabapple trees, juniper, rabbit brush, things with thorns. I thought that one was funny. So birds like things with thorns, anything with edible berries or places to hide. So that seemed like a helpful tip. Another person said, I live in the desert and most of the birds around me favor the thorny acacia over creosote bushes. And those are hints that that person is probably in a little bit of a warmer climate because we see creosotes covering the hillsides over down in the Bosque del Apache and Socorro region and not as much further north. But creosote is another one that is being planted more and more in Albuquerque, and y'all may have it more and more in Los Alamos County too. And then Maximilian sunflower, if you have room, because it spreads, the trumpet vine, and specific birds that they attract. Okay, you get the idea. Lumis spirea, more currants, more New Mexico olive. Excellent recommendations. I also appreciated this Apache plume comment. So Apache plume is another one that is a beautiful native shrub. And then finally, the last one I have to share is from Carl Horak, who's an admin for the Native Plants of New Mexico Facebook group. He says, don't forget to add a water feature. A tiny fountain or a bird bath with reliable water will really add to the attractiveness of the native plants in your yard. Thanks, Carl, for pointing that out. So with that, I have a couple more websites. So this is the Native Plant Society of New Mexico website, which has been recently revamped and is continuing to become stronger as a really user-friendly resource for all of us around the state and around the Southwest too. So you can find great information there. I also want to recommend that you reach out, if you haven't already, reach out to your Los Alamos Master Gardener program. And so you can find their website here and you can get in touch with them. I think I have that. Yeah, here's the website for them. I'll put that in the chat for you. So New Mexico Master Gardeners. And then just a little bit on mulch. So, I mean, many of our native species are drought and heat tolerant, and so they don't need mulch as much as some of these other species do, but you can still really benefit your entire landscape by incorporating mulch in different areas. So we'll get into this in a week and a half, but in case you can't join us for that, moisture retention in the soil is phenomenally better with a woody or a fibrous plant-based mulch. Temperature regulation is a really important one with our temperature fluctuations from day to night and from summer to winter. So the mulch provides both insulation in the winter from the cold and also insulation in the summer from the heat. And so allowing our leaf litter to just fall and that's why we call them leaves, because you should just leave them where they are. Leaf litter provides a great mulch. But weed control is a fantastic reason to mulch. If you're having problems with weeds in your yard, a couple inches. So generally the rule would be for weed control is 4 inches of mulch. The idea here is that you are really preventing the sun from accessing the soil and getting the, so that seeds that germinate in the soil aren't able to grow with a thick mulch layer. With mulches, I love wood chips, pine needles, leaf litter, bark chips. I guess, old plants, you kind of take an old tomato plant and crumple it up. That can be a great mulch too. So I'm not picky about the mulch. I just want to see it on more of our yards. Let's see, what's next? Yeah, so the mulching around things like this is an example with the artichoke, which is not a native plant, but then what can be beneficial is that these artichokes require 2 years, or they don't produce flowers and fruit until their 2nd year, and that means they have to make it through our cold winters. So mulching heavily over artichokes can be a way for us in central New Mexico to be able to grow and produce artichokes for our gardens. Okay, with that, thank you very much. And again, here's information on how to reach me on social media and also my blog where I post the weekly gardening columns. Next week, we're going to talk about this study. This is that study I was talking about that has the little native New Mexico olive trees planted in bare ground, rock, and in wood chips. And then maybe just save that information for next time. And I think we have some time now for questions and for discussion.
Yeah, there were some questions early on, Marisa. One of them was, can the public visit the agricultural science centers?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So yes and no. So the answer is, so they are open to the public. You can go and visit. You can, knock on the door during COVID and because the front door is locked to people that don't have an appointment. But because at least, so in the Las Lonas example, we have 4 extension researchers based there. Gil Gysi is our viticulture specialist with wine grapes. Mark Marsalis is our forages specialist, extension specialist, and Amanda Skidmore is our integrated pest management specialist, and myself. So of the 4 of us, we all are majority extension people that are working all over the state. So at any time that you show up, we may not be there to show you around. And if we are there, we may not be able to show you around. So it's like, yes, we're open to the public, but may not be the best to just show up. Each of the ag science centers around the state has field days and other different events that are going on. And so I think the closest one to you is the one in Alcalde. Many of you may have been to the Alcalde Ag Science Center. They have like fruit tree pruning workshops and sustainable agriculture workshops up there, hoop house workshops. And so those are examples of when they are open to the public, and we welcome everybody to stream in. But if you want to come to the Las Lonas Ag Science Center, I'd love to have you, but I recommend checking with me ahead of time to schedule a time that I'm there and can show you around.
There were some questions about the Penstemon garden at Peak, and I think that Kristen O'Hara, who is with us on the call, she says the Penstemons at Peak will be in prime later in May.
Okay.
So
good. I haven't missed it. That's really good news. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Let's see. And okay, there was another question. Do you have any recommendations about preventing invasive tree growth like Chinese or Siberian elm? Mulch, question mark?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so first of all, the question, that's an excellent question, and preventing the trees from getting started is the best way to deal with these invasive trees. So the Siberian elm is the one that we're concerned with. That's different than the Chinese elm. These are common names, and so that's a misconception there. Another common name for the Chinese elm is the lacebark elm, and so I like to use that common names because it helps to differentiate between the Siberian, which is a bad tree for our area, and the lacebark elm, which is great. And there are other elms that are also good for New Mexico, but the weedy ones are the ones that are the Siberian, and they drop all their leaves about now. And so mulch will help. So a thick layer of mulch will help. So any of the seeds that's in the soil, and they're there. If you've ever been at a place where you started watering and then you see all these little seeds come up, those are often Siberian elms. In the house I was renting in Las Lunas a couple of years ago, I put down a soaker hose and sunflower seeds just because I was going to be there just one summer, and I was excited to see that something was popping up. It wasn't the sunflower seeds. It was, I had a whole forest, probably hundreds of Siberian elms in this like 10-foot section of my backyard. And I didn't even have a Siberian elm within sight of my yard. So they blow in and hang out in the soil and are waiting there for the right conditions. So in that case, your thick layer of fibrous plant material mulch will help prevent those seeds from germinating and from, well, once they germinate, they won't be able to grow. And if they do grow and you can catch them, you can pull them. It's so satisfying to pull them when they're growing in mulch because they don't have a foothold yet. They have to get real scrawny. New seeds that come in on top can germinate, right? So over time, if you have rock or wood chip mulch, as that settles down and your new seeds that come in can germinate on top. And so either keep applying mulch every couple of years, get another thicker layer, or you still may need to go do a thinning, where you're pulling these Siberian elms when they're still very tiny. And that will help, I think, as long, once they get a year to 2 years in the ground, they're so difficult to pull. It's really a pain. I did write about the Siberian elm control for my blog. And so let me find that for you. I can put the link in here in the chat. So this one's called Controlling Weedy Invasive Polleny Siberian Elm Trees. I call it Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah. Thank you, great question. And so the reason that these other elms, like the frontier elm, the lacebark elm, are not problematic is because they drop their seed in the fall. And so the seed goes through the winter and is not viable come spring. So that's, but they also grow really well and can handle the heat, and it's a good tree for New Mexico.
So there's a whole bunch more questions. Let's we'll see how many we can make it through. I'm going to ask, what are good edible native plants?
Yeah, well, I was noticing in the list of all the ones that are good for birds, many of those are also good for for consumption. So to me, it's like, I can't help it, but the plant that always comes up first is this golden currant. I'm like obsessed with it. So golden currant is a great one. There are a bunch more examples, and actually I just got this question yesterday and would like to, must have been yesterday, and I would like to write a column just about shrubs for edible gardening. So, somebody put in the comment, chokecherry, great jam. Thank you very much. So chokecherry apparently is a really good one. And if you're joining us and you have other examples of shrubs that we can eat as humans, eat their fruit, then please put them in the in the chat now, that'd be great. Okay, what's next?
Okay, do you have any tips for getting new native plants established? That's a big question.
Yeah, yeah. So tips would be, don't give up. Don't just try one thing and then stop. One thing to do is to look at what your neighbor's growing, or maybe don't look at your neighbor, but look at your, somebody that's across town. How many of y'all have been to that beautiful demonstration garden just downtown in Los Alamos that the master gardeners set up? That's a great place to go. And there's plant signs there showing the names of plants. If it's somebody's yard and you're just interested, you could take a photo and use one of the plant apps that I love to ID the plant or ask a gardening friend. One thing I've always suggested, if you move into a house or you're new in the neighborhood or you just want to grow something and you see something in somebody else's yard, my answer is go up and knock on their door and ask them, with a mask on, ask them what they're growing. And you can make that communication and get the local information on what grows well. This year, I'm adding to that. Don't just ask what the plant is, also ask how much you have to water it. We really need to be thinking more about, and if they say, I love this plant, but I have to water it a lot, let's skip it and pick one that you have to water less, please. So I'm going to put that app, a couple apps that I really use every day for plant ID. And so I talk about them in this column here. Thank you.
There's another question. You showed some photos of grasses in pots. Isn't one of the great features of grasses their very extensive root systems? Do they really do well in pots?
Oh, thanks. So I don't think of them as that they have, so extensive is a great word, but doesn't necessarily mean broad. So it's like a lot of roots, but in a smaller mass. One of the, when we talk about plant botany, one of the ways to distinguish a plant that is a monocot or often grass versus a dicot and our broadleaf plants is that the broadleaf plants, when they first sprout, have a tap root and then the lateral roots coming off of it, whereas these monocots tend to have more of a cluster mass of roots. And so they actually grow really well in pots and can stay for a long time. I actually tortured my sand love grass all winter, didn't do anything with it. I even took this funny TikTok video of me saying, I put these dead plants outside so that people, to lower people's expectations of my gardening ability, but it's sprouted back and I watered it just before I left town. I was very excited to see. So that's growing great in a container. So they do grow really well in containers. I think they'll be happier in the soil. And so you could transplant them after some time. Thanks.
I wanted to say that I think there's just a few more questions. And so if Marisa, is it okay with you if we stay on till like 8:05 or something like that?
Great.
Okay, and for anyone who wants to leave already, I did just also want to invite you. There is an event this Saturday at the Hans Bethe House of Los Alamos Historic Society, and that is a seedling and plant seedling giveaway and seed swap. And I also noticed that there's going to be like a plant exchange in downtown Los Alamos. So there's lots of plant activities happening this weekend. And then Marisa will be speaking again on Tuesday, May 18th, and you can register for that through the website at Peak, and she will be speaking on the magic of mulch. And I also just wanted to ask people if you wouldn't mind, except that link is not going to work, I can see. I'm going to get a link that will work. If you have a minute to reply to our survey, I would really appreciate it. But then I will read a few more questions here. So let's see. Okay. I would like to start a native wildflower meadow. When is the best time to seed it?
Yeah, okay. Well, there's, it partly depends on what you're trying to grow, right? So if we think about the natural life cycle of many of these native flowers and annuals and perennials also, many of them are dropping their seed in the late summer, early fall, and that's also during monsoon season. So in my mind, that is one reason to use that window, that monsoon window and early fall as a time to broadcast wildflower seed, not for this year, but for next year. There are many species that require that exposure to cold before they are able to germinate and sprout. However, we often don't get that much of a monsoon season, and so that may not be a good idea to wait. And actually, I just answered this question, which annual flowers to plant, for my column this week, which is not posted to the blog yet, but it'll be posted later tonight. And I think that so a couple things. One is that they're going to need moisture if it's not monsoon, or if we have a bad monsoon season, which I call mon later or mon never season, that we can benefit these plants that are trying to get established in our yard, especially with annual flowers, by sprinkling those seeds where you are already watering something else. So if it's in a veggie garden, I don't mind. Have the flowers coming up in your veggie garden. Have them, you can put them around the perimeter of the garden where you'll remember to water. You can put them around shrubs. If you're planting a rose bush, go ahead and put some cosmos around it. For me, that helps me remember to water the newly planted shrub. When I see that my cosmos or sunflower is, the leaves are really limp and they need water, I think it's beneficial. But so when's the best time? For mixes, you could try some now, some in the middle of summer, some in the fall, and depending on the circumstances in your yard, I think you'll have better luck if you spread out when you try it. But remembering somehow where you put the seeds so that you're able to water them when you think of it, or without the soil drying down too much between. Oh, I found cosmos planted around tomatoes, deters deer a little bit. Ooh, that sounds good. Thanks for that tip, Colleen. And now I can scroll, let's see.
Yeah.
So the one person asked about attending the seed swap, even if you don't have something to swap. I'm not even a part of that organization, and I won't be able to attend, but yes, it's kind of like going to a potluck. Like, I burn everything. Nobody wants to eat what I bring. I just show up with an empty container, and there's always plenty. So that's how those seed swaps tend to be.
Yes, there will be plenty for everyone.
Oh, and Allison recommended gooseberries. That sounds wonderful. The banana belt.
There's a question, does mulch need to be close to the stem of the plants or further away to prevent pathogens?
Yeah, thanks. Well, that's another one that's a confusing, there's no easy answers, it seems like. What's it called? The consensus has been to, if you have a tree or a plant with a trunk, so like a perennial shrub, to keep the mulch back just a few inches from the base to allow it some room to breathe. And the idea was that then you're not harboring a spot for moisture to rot at the base of your tree, or for borers to get in, or fungus to grow. However, there is new evidence that may not be true, and that the new evidence found that, or the new research found that it wasn't that the bark base, that the mulch around the base of the trunk was what was the problem. It was that mulching the base of the tree hid the fact that the tree was planted too deep, and that planting too deep is the biggest problem. Oh my goodness. So I didn't have time in today's talk to get into all of the different care and planting, but planting too deep for our perennial plants is a major issue. And we think, it's so hot and dry, let me dig a really deep hole, and then the plants are too deep and they're dying left and right. And so it may be that it's not the mulch that was the culprit in those cases. So for now, sure, when you notice it, pull back the mulch and give that trunk room to breathe. And in my case, when over time it kind of slides back into place around the trunk, I don't freak out about that. I don't need to worry about it too much, but.
It was underneath the barbecue?
No.
Okay, I think there might have been one more question, but which is about deer. And let's see. This will be the last question. I think it was any tips for preventing deer from eating your new plantings?
Yeah. So this is a difficult one, and actually it's another that's on my list. Thank you for asking this. I really do need to publish a column on it, and I'll get input from people around the state on different things that have worked. My understanding is that there are certainly some plants that deer like more than others, but that a really hungry deer is going to damage plants that even are on that list of ones that are deer proof. So that's not a win all in that case. If there's any way that you can protect the individual plant, like with a temporary cage until it gets big enough that it can withstand some nibbling, that's my best go-to. I think I don't have that problem in my yard because I live in a town in Las Lunas, and so I haven't dealt with it enough. So I'm not the best person to answer that. I think that reaching out to your local master gardeners, I bet they'll have some really good tips. And stay tuned for my column coming up, because I'm going to write that one down, and I am interested in answering that. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to say thank you so much, Marisa, and we got very lots of appreciative comments, and including that your knowledge is way too extensive for 1 hour. But Marisa will be back.
That's right.
She'll be back in 2 weeks, and hopefully she can do more public presentations like this for us. So I really want to thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah,
thank you,
all.
Marisa.
It really is inspiring. There's so many people that care about plants in New Mexico. So thank you.
All right.